Hello, and welcome to episode 31. Today's subject, King Edward II. Edward was born in 1284, and he was the first English Prince of Wales, having been born, I think, at Carnarvon Castle, and held atop the balcony by Edward, and proclaimed as the new prince. As much as it could assuage the Welsh population is, of course, up to debate. He liked horses and dogs, like most royal people do, but he got criticism for enjoying more lower class activities such as rowing, ditching, and hedging. He was also seen to be quite good looking. He helped his father out in Scotland from 1300, and as a result of his activities was knighted and made Duke of Aquitaine in 1306 at a very lavish ceremony in Westminster Abbey. It is during the 1300s, before he becomes king, that he meets Piers Gaveston, who he definitely had some very close fraternal bond with, but may have also been intimate with sexually. So this actually comes to define quite a bit of his reign and how his reign goes quite badly wrong. So he marries Isabella of France as soon as he becomes king, in order to relieve Anglo-French tension. And again, this actually works very well until about 1326, before he stops being king. He abandoned the Scottish campaign that Edward I had begun and obviously died from, and actually ended up promoting Gaveston because Edward I wasn't a fan of Gaveston, and this kind of rubbed up the wrong tree with the nobles, to be honest, and it became an issue for the 1308 Parliament, which I think was Edward's first Parliament. He actually forces Edward to exile Piers to Gascony, but he eventually persuades the Pope to withdraw the threat of excommunication, because it was the threat of excommunication from the Archbishop of Canterbury that caused Edward to send Gaveston away initially. So Gaveston was still around, the issue persisted. He took Piers on campaign to Scotland, but again, this campaign was a disaster, so Edward was forced to agree to the 1311 ordinances, which reduced the royal prerogative, which is basically the power of the monarch, as the term still used today. And this was almost like an update of the provisions of Westminster and of Oxford signed under Henry III, but this does not actually reduce tensions in the way that the other two sort of did. And so in 1312, Edward renounced the ordinances. Gaveston, who had again been exiled, was returned, but was captured and then executed by the Earl of Warwick in Warwick Castle, because they just simply had enough of him, and he was perceived to be a very bad influence on the king. Edward was angry, but he was placated by the rebellious barons, who annoyed at him and Gaveston, as they promised to fund a Scottish campaign, another one in exchange for clemency. And this resulted in 1314 in one of the most famous battles at Bannockburn. Robert the Bruce had ended up taking most of the castles in Scotland, I think, apart from Stirling Castle in central of Scotland, which had been holding out for quite a while. Edward marched his troops up there, and Robert the Bruce quite cunningly gave battle where Edward did not expect, so the troops were pretty much in marching order for most of the time rather than battle order, which meant it was quite chaotic. There was quite a lot of marshland around, so there wasn't room to manoeuvre particularly, and obviously the Scots knew the land much better than the English did. The English were routed, and this has of course gone down in the annals of Scottish history. Not only did it basically end the English power in Scotland until, I guess, when James became king after the death of Elizabeth in 1603, but also even in 2014, it was very propitious, perhaps, for the Scottish National Party, for they called the independence referendum to, I think, correspond with the Battle of Bannockburn. Independence from the English in 1314, independence from the English in 2014. It worked so well. Alas, they didn't vote for independence, so that is that. However, for Edward, the problems continued. A year later, there was a famine, which lasted for 2 years, and eventually triggered the Despencer Wars, depends how you want to pronounce that. A noble family who'd basically overextended themselves was basically the new Piers Gaveston, Hugh Despencer was, and had ended up taking a lot of lands in the sort of southwestern Welsh regions and trampled on the rights of other barons. So a coalition formed against them, and was successful. Edward was very angry and obviously retaliated, enough so that he was able to basically purge those noblemen of any kind of resources. So he was very rich again. He decided to, surprise, surprise, invade Scotland again, but it was a failure. So this kind of reduced Edward's political capital. Each time he tried to invade Scotland and he was beaten back, he had to re-sign the ordinances. His political capital was extremely low. However, this last time in 1322 actually ended in the 13-year truce, which Edward would not live to wait out for, because in 1322 a new king of France emerged called Charles, who was much more bellicose. Edward was the underling of Charles in the sense that Edward was the ruler of Gascony, but Gascony owed its feudal allegiance to the French king, and when Charles summoned Edward to pay homage, Edward refused to do so, and so Charles went, it's free real estate in Gascony, and decided to invade. In response, Edward sent his wife, who was the sister of Charles, Isabella, to go and negotiate, but it actually turned out that Isabella basically stayed in France, didn't bother coming back, and because I think she was annoyed at Edward for all the times he kind of rode roughshod over her opinions and her friends. She was quite annoyed in their marriage. I think they'd broken up, even though they had loved each other at the beginning of their marriage, which is quite sad, I guess. And I'd also actually fallen for another man called Roger Mortimer, who, again, Edward had exiled. Edward was quite ruthless and not really very canny about it. And they eventually invaded England in 1326, I think, perhaps with the financial support, at least, of Charles. And Edward failed to mobilise an army because no one wanted to support him anymore, because he was seen as a bit of a drag, really. No one really wanted to support him. So in 1327 he was forced to abdicate the throne, which I think at this point is a first in English history, if memory serves me correctly. Yeah, I think that's true. And he was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, and without Edward III's knowledge, so he abdicated in favour of his son Edward III, who you probably have heard of, and he was killed, probably murdered by supporters of Roger Mortimer, who was quite high up in the new government of Edward III. Edward III didn't know, obviously, that his father was being killed. And yeah, now, and since then, rumours have emerged of how he died. So allegedly, he had a red hot poker stuck up his posterior, which was said to be a reference to his homosexuality, and indeed mocking it, because back then, obviously, being gay was very much frowned upon by the church and society in general. So, you know, it's quite humiliation for Edward. Even if he was gay, there's no evidence that he actually was. So, that's that. Edward, personally, I don't think he was particularly good. I think he was quite able as well, but I think he just made a series of quite bad decisions. I think he underestimated the Scots a little bit, and I think he wasn't very politically realistic. And he took I suppose he took a lot of political risks, but they didn't really pay off, and maybe they were too big a gamble, and he didn't really think through what he was doing, especially with people like Gaveston and Despenser, like placing those two men above all other considerations was bound to alienate enough people that he couldn't really do. But I think really you can't really overstate how bad it was that each time he went to Scotland he was beaten back. I mean, that's quite devastating political capital, especially given England was such a bigger country than Scotland, and Edward, would come with 20,000 men each time they get beaten back. I mean, it's not a very good look, is it? So I don't think it's fair to say that Edward was a very good king. I think he was a pretty bad king, but we've had worse, and we will have worse. So that's that. So the next episode, 32, will be on King Edward III.